How's that? Better? Yes. All right. Jordan Scott is originally from Coquitlam, British Columbia, now lives in Vancouver. His first book of poetry, Silt, was published by New Star Books in 2005 and was nominated for the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize. He completed his second book, Blurt, published by Coach House Books in 2008 while a writer in residence at the International Writers and Translators Center in Rhodes, Greece. Mr. Scott teaches creative writing at Simon Fraser University. In his books, Jordan Scott gives us poems that dwell in discontinuities of the utterance, exploring palpably the gap between thought and landscape in which the thought occurs in Silt, and that between the thought in the mind and what is physically uttered, particularly in Blurt. In Scott's words, Blurt enacts a poetics of the stutter, in which every word is achieved through bodily negotiation, and in which the units of inquiry are the syllable, rhythm, and the utterance itself. He calls the book a threat to coherence. In an afterword to the book, Scott tells us that Blurt is, at its base level, a text written to be as difficult as possible for me, someone with a stutter, to read. The mass and speed of syllabic and sonic tasks that one must perform to read the book, whether in the mouth or at the back of the throat, is exhilarating, and in this sense, the poems posit a negotiation with bodily constraint that is, above all, joyful. A poetics of the stutter is one that bypasses the tired binary of speech versus silence. Here, eloquence is not positioned in opposition to silence or in opposition to noise, but is instead achieved through bodily labor, as a negotiation between the desire to say and the bodily constraints that twist and sometimes warp what one may have intended to say into something else. The body provides here not just the beginning of thought, but also a physical intervention which turns the thought into new directions. Here, the stutter lays the ground for the poet's journey, sometimes back towards the original impulse for speech and sometimes playfully outwards to explore the twists that the body's symptoms propose. Please welcome Jordan Scott.
All right, well, thanks so much for that. Oh, my paper's missing up here. Did you?
Just add lips up.
Thank you. You are all in on your clothes, right? You're not in your underpants. I thought that was the dream that I was having there. Okay. I'm extremely humbled to be here, and I think it's some kind of mistake. But then somebody sent me a check in the mail, and I wore a tie, so it's going to be harder for security to kick me out. But now that I have your attention, I'll read from this talk that I wrote specifically for this conference, and I'm just going to start with just a brief abstract. So in my newest approach, sort of taking a lateral step from Blurt and my research into the stutter, I'm working from the stutter and moving into expanded notions of disfluencies as applied to the procedures of interrogation. As a first point of investigation, I am pouring through the interrogation training manuals and logs from Gitmo and Abu Ghraib, as well as from the Vancouver Police Department, as well as formative interrogations in film, looking for instances in the interrogation booth when disfluencies collide with the corporeal and grammatical expectations of interrogation to mark the body as traitorous in its porosity, suspicious in its rupture, and lying in its faults. So the title of my talk is The State of Talk, or Forced Drift, Notes towards Speech Disfluencies and State Interrogation Procedures and Techniques. And I'll start with a quote from Beckett from The Unnameable. In the frenzy of utterance, the concern with truth, hence the interest of a possible deliverance by means of an encounter, but not so fast, first dirty, then make clean. This is an excerpt from Sworn Statement File 002401 CID 389, made from a redacted U.S. Marine to a DOD investigator on March 25th, 2004 at Abu Ghraib prison. In this document, a Department of Defense investigator questions a U.S. Marine interrogator about the death of an Iraqi man during an interrogation session at the prison. Question: tell me what happened. Answer: the prisoner was dressed in an orange jumpsuit and had a plastic sandbag over his head. His hands were handcuffed behind his back and his legs were shackled. The prisoner was difficult to control. We shackled the prisoner to bars in the shower room. After 30 to 45 minutes of interrogation, I saw that the prisoner began slouching. I said something to the effect of, "I guess he doesn't want to talk to us anymore." I shook the prisoner and applied pressure to a pressure point on the prisoner's jaw. The prisoner did not respond. I removed the bag from his head and I checked his pulse. The prisoner had no pulse. I tilted the prisoner forward after removing his cuffs, and a large amount of blood poured from his mouth. Question: did you see any other injuries on the prisoner? Answer: no. Question: can you describe the demeanor of the interrogation team before and after the interrogation? Answer: before, it was like every other day. We took our gear off and grabbed a cup of coffee. Then we just went into the shower room. After we found out he was dead, we were nervous. Question: during the interrogation, did you hear any noises coming from the prisoner other than his answers? Answer: not really. Question: before you found out he was dead, did the prisoner have any discomfort while walking or breathing? Answer: I have no idea. He was yelling and thrashing. Question: was he resistive in any way during the questioning? Answer: not really. He was just yelling. Question: did he have normal speech? Answer: I don't really remember. The body in this shower room is thrown into, shackled to, absolute translation, a translation without pole of reference and without source language. For the body in the shower room, there are only target languages. We know what you did. Tell us, and I'll make it easier on yourself. Tell us what we already know. Target languages, language targets, whole interrogative mouths, chock full of glossaries to fix on the shifting eyes, the high-pitched voice, the fidgeting, the silence, the forgetfulness, the agitation, the slips of tongue, the stutter. The interrogator's sonar tongue list out for the blip, which then determines force, fault, lack of narrative logic, and culpability. The interrogator's desire is prosaic. To acquire information, language keeps, to narrate against the captive body and the arising speech, which then forms into the continuous narrative that mediates the social force in the world, determining what can and cannot be said while consolidating dominant stories and truths. Captive bodies confirm arguments, and interrogators mark their stance here in this body in relation to the evidential value of the elicited detail, which gradually transforms into a coerced narrative over the course of the interrogation. The detainee does not change his or her story. Rather, it is changed by the evaluative process of the interrogator. Words are put in the mouth, its sentences expanding through an excess of subordination. However, the language of interrogation, despite its steadfast rules, organizes its criteria as taking at all times advantage of the moment to moment of the subject's resistances, a sinister language without an itinerary, language targets, target languages shifting borders, a performance in forced drift, a very specific interrogation technique, forced drift, defined from document ACID 9512 as, and so when you're interrogating somebody, you're trying to get information out of somebody, and they don't give you it, then you ramp it up, particularly if there are no rules to guide you, and then you go more and more. Or to drive into heaps as a current of wind drifts, snow, or sand, imagined here as a poetics of increasing intensity, language in the act or motion of drifting, the force which impels or drives, an overpowering influence or impulse as basalt plates on tongues, the platelets wrought on or in mouths adrift and examined as veins, to then follow that vein, to then ascertain the weakness, rupture, the soft core collision, forced drift as a poetics to enter the shower room as language itself, as a scene of extorted resistances, all motions and relations, as currents do a floating body, forced drift as being in resistances and being of the apparatus, a continuous, discontinuous mark tracing out the entirety of language, a being within itself designated here as the will not. I want to enter this forced drift, this shower room, the noise, silence, and the not normal speech, not in order to represent or describe someone so rigorously adrift, but to show the nature of this speechlessness. The poetics of interrogation as an apparatus, the forced drifts of mouths, or to encounter the nature of the speech before we find the body. Question: did he have normal speech, or a stutter or disfluency that marks the body as traitorous, false, and halted? I want to investigate disfluency as rupture within an interrogative language structure premised on the fluency, speed, and the necessity for just the facts, ma'am, of narrative. The smooth operator of communicative function. Disfluencies within these structures as seismic mouths in Richter, which permit the interrogator to graph the faults as lies. The lying body, the body is speech, a lying speech arising as such. Now, I have some clips that I'd like to play, and I'd like to preface the clips as, I suppose, a quotidian, maybe conditioning, maybe something that Nicole was talking about yesterday, the real, the fictional, and the virtual, and how those collide and collude. Because oftentimes the procedures of interrogation, which actually inscribe themselves on these bodies, are often taken from films and movies. I'm particularly Jack Bauer and 24. I'm not showing those, but I will be showing. My first clip is from my cousin Vinny. In this scene, the lawyer for Vinny is giving the opening statements to prove his client's story is accurate.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, on January 4th of this year, my client did indeed visit the Sack of Suds convenience store, but he didn't kill anyone.
So a truncated reading of the manuals themselves from various websites also reveals such a construction of disfluency as a mark of what is false. I'm just going to read that now. Speech and language patterns can provide valuable forensic information during an interrogation. The subject's speech patterns and language constructs can provide a remarkable window into the human psyche. Speech disfluency during an interrogation is a gauge of the speaker's general anxiety levels and, more importantly, variations of his or her anxiety associated with specific statements and questions. That is, the increased speech disfluencies are associated with or caused by conflicts. As an interrogator, you can use the subject's speech patterns to cut through irrelevant and deceptive information and get to the truth of a crime or an incident. Disfluencies are then considered most of the time to be false and should be seized upon by the well-trained interrogator. You are a mouthpiece through which these non-fluent statements can be filtered. You can produce a proper speech to fit the offense. Under this rubric, it is as if in one of these hesitations, breaths, you were lying by confessing the lie of such fictions as the listener and understand, partners of the speaker, the unified speech flow, and so on. These fictions produce a completely distorted idea of the complex and multifaceted process of active speech communication. In interrogation, one is always within this fiction of clarity or threat disfluency, a promissory fiction extended all the way to a point of threatening disdain, the kind of disdain for the stutter which stems from the fear of the uncontrollable within our own bodies. This is from Christophe Mignon. Recasting the foreign entity as intimacy, the somatic stutter revealing the metaphoric one, the foreign which rhythms you, with which we do our utmost to eradicate or submerge. This process of disdain allows for the shock of the foreign to be inscribed on the subject's body, speech, and language as transformations of errors into truth. A performance which can be expressed physically as well as verbally, expropriating and forcing the error to submit to the interrogator's own intentions of rooting out, seeking out the truth from a mouth as treasure trove. We'll go to a fish called Wanda, where stuttering Ken, which is his name, is tied up to a chair.
What's happening? Well, Ken, I'm going to ask you some questions while I eat my chips. First, who is the philosopher who developed the concept of the Superman in Also sprach Zarathustra? No? A chip up the nose, I'm afraid. Friedrich Nietzsche. Next. In which book did Nietzsche claim that almost all higher culture is based on cruelty? Are you thinking, or are you in mid-stutter? No. Bad. Oh, beyond good and evil. That's an easy one, huh, Ken? Okay. Where are the diamonds? I'll give you a clue.
Here we are in the forced drift and escalating structure of interrogation based on the subject's resistances, forcing speech up to a forced production of language now imagined as mid-thought or mid-stutter. Silence erupts in this forced production, extorting speech so as to make it impossible to speak, producing language to manufacture silence. The gaps as such within the hesitation form vacuoles only to enter the interrogator's material as language, as plot, as spit and speech, a ventriloquism, forceful and ventricle, all mouths in the puppet confession that cannot be narrated beyond ventriloquism. Yes, I did it. I am responsible. I take responsibility. I'll give you what you need. I'm sorry for what I have done. All said without a hitch. So then, what of a poetics of resistance to such a regime of fluency? What of the possibilities of using the very apparatuses of forced drift which elicited, entangled, and demanded the non-normal speech of the shower room body against itself? A poetics to claim disfluency as empowering, as a means of hesitated poetics, to subvert the attempt to exert power via policing the line between fluency, disfluency, and the meaning implications of both speech acts. Christophe Mignon certainly argues for the stutter or disfluency as utensils in a palette of mischievousness and deception, a remainder remaining entirely beyond control. Or perhaps Susan Howe's concept of hesitation, from hesitate, from the Latin, and I'm quoting her for a bit here, meaning to stick, stammer, to hold back in doubt, have yet difficulty speaking, presented as a tactically necessary force. The hesitation which circled back and surrounded everyone in that confident age of aggressive industrial expansion and brutal empire building, hesitation and separation. He might pause, she hesitated. All speech acts under the tongue with a relativizing edge to unveil impairment's power, to perhaps fashion a forced drift poetics, and here I'm looking at Rob Halpern's essay on committing the fault, by laying one's body or speech down at the fault, slip, error, stutter, rupture, the body as seismograph, registering the crisis, disrupting the smooth transition of training, discipline that otherwise conceals the wound, to lay our fault bodies, faulted speech here, where all the conventional links and patterning appear not as smooth functioning, but buckle and slip under pressure of whatever stately orders that wounds remained invisible. End quote. But interrogation anticipates this buckle and slip, fawns over it, celebrates disfluency for its own ends, but more poignantly constructs confession as therapeutic. I'm thinking here of Tim Trengrove Jones's article, Larkin's Stammer, which explores the biographical implications of Larkin's stammer as not simply a private sin, but a public wound, a commons of disfluency that marked Larkin's mouth hesitant, cat got your tongue, a dementedly open pore just begging for further questioning. Jones claims that Larkin took to poetry, the written, as compensation for the sad incompetence of human speech, that Larkin needed writing as exorcism of the tongue's unreliability. And the last quote from A Fish Called Wanda. So here, the therapeutic slow down, try singing colludes with interrogation, where, what, when, hurry, to produce the climax of every performance of interrogation, the written confession. The tongue submits to the pen's erasure. Make it easier on yourself. Just tell us everything. The detective slides the foolscap and pen across the table. Here, write everything down in your own words. Also, perhaps the question from the first document detailing the shower room interrogation. Question, did he have normal speech? Meaning, did he show signs of telling the truth? Perhaps amidst the in-between of yelling, thrashing, or the moments after the disfluent, maybe you heard something I could write down and take with me. The mouth here imagined as washed out glottal exhaustion, the rest and release from disfluent schism or stuttering Ken's one and only fluent utterance after having written out his stutter, the scrawl confessing what the mouth cannot, fluency, desired to ingratiate, desired for the simple gesture of to stop talking. Desired because this is the performance, what language wants language needs, a liar, not in the margins or in the subterrane, but written all over the arc, anticipating submission, forced drift as a poetics in and of interrogation, one in which you want out, but only through propitiation, one in which you will say anything just to make it stop, one that drifts each moment into resistances you willingly offer and yet let crumble. A poetics of horse drift, now simultaneously imagined as language's disfluent anticipation and as disfluencies lusted after sedation. Thank you.
I'd just like to say that was lovely. That was really brilliant. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
That was just excellent. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kristen. Thank you.
Am I supposed to say something? Do you have a collection of clips or representations, you know, of stutters? I guess it would have to be film clips, because this is that was actually amazing. Aside from that, the speech was really interesting. You know, the clips. What was revealed to me of you know, casual comedy, my knowledge of the films, which I'd both seen miraculously, where I forgot, of course, that this. Do you know what I'm saying? So,
I do, yeah.
are there other clips, and
Yeah,
would
after-
they show the same?
Yeah, after the King's speech came out, Slate magazine compiled representations of the stutter in film, but a lot of them were just like sort of a gloss of all the representations. But in A Fish Called Wanda, there's a lot more at stake because of the violence of it, of the trying to get information out of the stutterer. Yeah.
My question is, are they always played? Once you have a play for comedy,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so to speak, the King's Tongue or whatever,
Yeah.
is obviously not. But are they mostly played for one genre or another, or is
Yes.
it still a question of
Yeah. A comedy, redemption, or the psychopath. Yeah. That's generally the rubric. What's that? Right. Yeah. Yeah, but for him, it's redemption in that movie. I mean, that's right. But
Hi, Jordan. That was brilliant. I wonder if you could talk about how issues of disfluency and the traitorous body may link to issues of Creole and issues around the use of standard Englishes or standard European languages versus demotics or vernaculars and so on. You and I were talking about Glissant's
did.
theories.
Yeah, we did. We talked about Glissant, right, and his discussions of the Creole, about disguising the scream as, you know, for the listener as being completely inarticulate, all the while it's working towards a real mischievousness, right? And then we also talked about conceptions of Legba's limp, right? That conception of Legba as straddling borders, right? And his limp as somehow also coming out in his speech as well, right? So I definitely think that there's a lot of connections in that for sure. Yes, yeah. Particularly around the border that we were talking about in your talk, you know, and I think that a lot of this discussion came out of confrontations at the border with disfluent speech and having to prepare speech plans ahead of time, not to, so that you sort of know what you're talking about, right? That you have an alibi, and there's not sort of prolonged hesitations, right? Yeah.
That was wonderful. I had a question about in the poetics of disfluency and in these different modes of interrogation and the poetics of the shower room and these scripted films and the script and performance. Also,
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there's how the poetics of disfluency would interfaces with performance and particularly thinking about the writing in these scenes and the written confession. Is there poetics of disfluency for the page? Or is it? I mean, I think the media questions of poetics of disfluency are really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So, so is there a poetics of disfluency for the page, right? I think it's in grammar. I think it's interrogating grammar. That's what I think it is, because I think that grammar sets sort of rules for the mouth, right? A pause, a hyphen, a period, right? And I think, it's like strictly personally, those have always been irrelevant for me. Like they can either be there or they cannot, right? Similarly with the fragment or in jammment in poetry, right? Those things for me are also irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Yeah, right. But I think that's a great question, and I think that it's something that I always struggle with, how to represent that disfluency on the page, and not just sort of fall into this the same sort of what Deleuze talks about in his essay. He stuttered, right? Not being satisfied with the graphic marker, right? So, yeah.
That was fantastic, and it was
thank
very,
you, Adina.
very
Thank
exciting
you.
to hear that. Particularly, I was interested in earlier when I was talking, and we were talking about the ventilation holes inside my text, and I was particularly taken with that little segment that you really articulate. You were talking about the schizophrenia within the absent spaces, and I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind. It was the section, I think, right after the first Fish Called Wanda clip, and I was just wondering if you might repeat that little couple lines.
I think it's the vacuoles one where
Yes.
the hesitation. For Susan Howe, that idea of the hesitation in she was talking about Dickinson's work, and her concept of hesitation was I think somehow anarchic, right? Because it was existing sort of around and between that sort of what she was perceiving as the Olsonian, like one perception must immediately follow another perception. But I think in interrogation, though, I think the problem becomes more complex, because when you hesitate or when you are disfluent, even if that disfluency isn't symptomatic, even if it's just like ruptures in our everyday speech, right? Then I think the problem is that it allows the interrogator to fill that space, right? So there's something definitely going on there that I can't simply dismiss as just, well, being that sort of stutter or that sort of hesitancy in that situation is being subversive or positive or anything. Yeah.
Thank you.
I was wondering, like, the process of listening to poetry, to live poetry, of sort of confronting the other. When I have my thought process and my egocentrism, and then I'm allowing somebody else's thoughts to come in and to be like truly meditatively present.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you thought there's a process of the shock of the foreign, and there's a disfluency in other people's thoughts and my thoughts, and then fully being open and allowing like poetry, another person's thoughts in sort of like kind of a dialectical Hegelian synthesis of the shock of the foreign is what possibly allows one to open oneself up and receive something that is different, and whether that is sort of a positive aspect of disfluency of thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think Christophe Mignon talks about this way better than I could, but I think that I mean, certainly when Artaud is talking about the stutter, he's talking about it in terms of thinking, right? He's just got this great quote where he essentially is just questioning the fluency of his own thoughts while he is thinking, and what is sort of happening to him while he's formulating these thoughts, right? And then what actually comes out, and saying that that's always going to be for him inadequate, right? So I think that maybe answers some of the question, but it's a very interesting idea that I haven't really thought of. But I think I've always been careful to negotiate the metaphoric use of the stutter, and then the actual symptoms, right? And I think that's important to me too, right? So yeah.
Is that where poetics comes in interrogation too, in the fact that they're essentially using the stutter metaphorically?
Right. Yes. Yeah. Well.
As a sign of.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think so. Yes. Yeah.
So that was just a comment. Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks. I have a question that's on a slightly different tack. In your afterword, note to Blurt, you speak about a moment when I think you were a child and your father took you fishing to a lake. He said that on particularly difficult speech days at school, your father let you not go to school and take you fishing, and that you tell a story about him pointing to a body of water and saying, and that the waves were lapping at the shore, and and saying that your voice is like that, like the tides that you're, and do I have that fairly?
Yeah. I mean, my father was those days were mainly so he could go and drink down by the Fraser, but yeah. But yes, yeah. It is true. Yeah.
Well, not having known that.
Yeah.
Reading that passage, there was something really reassuring that sat in my body, thinking about comparing a bodily process of negotiation to something that's happening in the natural world. And then I started thinking about how it's really difficult to look at bodies of water today without thinking about water pollution, drugs and rivers, not being able to drink from them. Yeah,
but not even that as well. And I think that's an excellent question. But I mean, part of what had me started on this whole talk is Caroline Bergfall's essay. When I saw her a while ago, it's called "Cat in the Throat," and the last question that she asks in that essay is she's talking about waterboarding, right? And she's asking what kind of language is going to come out of that, and for what sort of madness. So I think that water maybe will is definitely taken on something very, very different as well. Like along with sort of the ecological side of things, which you're talking about, also as a political tool is what it's essentially been turned into. I mean, there's always been water torture, but now it's just much more prominent in our culture, at least, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan, thank you.
Thank you, Charles. Thank you. Thank you.